So welcome to this latest instalment of AmCham's Diversity and Inclusion series of podcasts and videos for 2020. My name is Shane Herbert and I'm currently the country lead for RGP Australia. I'm also a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. Before I introduce our panel today, I would like to first acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I happen to be recording this meeting from my home office in Sydney's northern suburbs near Hornsby, where the Darug and the Guringai people are the traditional owners of the land that they have walked on and cared for thousands of years. Wherever you are listening or watching, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and pay our respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples taking part in this podcast. So we're joined today by two very experienced leaders in diversity, equity and inclusion. Nupur Bhushan is the Chief People Officer at ResMed, and Rowan Arndt is a Global Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Leader at Boeing. I'll introduce both of our speakers in greater detail shortly, but firstly I'm going to hand over to Adam Seri, who is General Manager at AmCham, to say a few words of introduction. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Shane. The AmCham National Diversity and Inclusion Committee is very proud to present this recorded webinar series, which is called The Difference, where committee members and guests are in dialogue to make a difference and to spark a change in you, the audience, and to work towards a more diverse, equitable and inclusive workplace. In today's recorded webinar, our D&I committee member, Shane, as you heard from before, from RGP, will facilitate a discussion with our two guest speakers, Rowan and Nupur, as Shane mentioned, on the future of work and the impacts and opportunities for diversity and inclusion in changing workplaces. So without further ado, I'll hand back over to Shane to take it away.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate having you with us today. So now I'd like to provide some context to today's conversation with Nupur and Rowan. Some of our discussions in AmCham's Diversity and Inclusion Committee have centred on what is often termed, and I've written here in inverted commas, the future of work. And will the evolving way that individuals and organisations manage work be a positive or a negative to diversity, equity and inclusion? I mentioned that I'm the country lead for RGP, and we are a global consulting firm headquartered in California. And we work as a human capital partner for our clients around the world to help them solve business problems and create transformative change. And we work with approximately 4,000 consulting professionals who range from full-time employees to project-based consultants to independent contractors. And in many ways, RGP is at the forefront of the future of work, bringing greater workforce flexibility and scalability to our clients, but also providing our consultants with more autonomy and flexibility in how they manage their work and life balance. So a starting hypothesis for today's conversation is that the so-called future of work is already here. COVID-19 has forced individuals and organisations to adapt and accelerate change and adapt to new ways of working. Workplaces have changed through things like remote working, through flexible hours, through blending teams of permanent employees with project staff, including contractors and gig workers. We've experienced great advances in technology, such as being able to hold these meetings here on Zoom today, working from home. We've created much greater flexibility, but we've also potentially increased risks of isolation, anxiety, and sometimes loss of team and culture in organisations. So with this in mind, let's talk about the future of work and its impact on diversity and inclusion. Nupur Bhushan is the Chief People Officer at ResMed. Nupur, ResMed has been an Australian company for many years and is now headquartered in the US. I'd like to start with you, and can you please tell us a little bit about ResMed, then introduce your role and the people side of ResMed, and finally, can you tell us how ResMed has been working to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace before COVID-19?
Sure. Thanks, Shane. And pleasure to be here. So as you said, I'll start with talking a little bit about ResMed. As you said, we were founded in Australia about 30 years ago and are currently listed on the NYSE and the ASX. We actually operate in over 140 countries with 7,500 employees across about 40 countries. And as the name suggests, we are a medical devices technology-led company with solutions that treat and keep people out of the hospital, empowering them to live healthier quality, higher quality lives. We diagnose, treat, and manage respiratory disorders, and our digital health technologies and cloud-connected medical devices transform care for people with sleep apnea, COPD, and other chronic diseases. Our aspiration is to be able to improve, help 250 million lives by 2025. As for everybody, 2020 has really been an unprecedented year and has really been a challenging year, but it has been the year which has provided ResMed, us ResMedians, an opportunity to truly live our mission of saving lives, where we've had to triple the production of ventilators in response to the COVID crisis. We manufactured over 150,000 ventilators against all kinds of supply chain odds, all the additional challenges that the pandemic has brought along. So really, it has been a great year for the organization to showcase what we really do for patients and people, but equally, it has been very difficult for many of our people internally, just grappling with what the pandemic has brought about. So as I think the second part of what you asked me, Shane, is to really introduce myself. As you said, I am the Global Chief People Officer of ResMed. I'm based in Sydney. I've been with ResMed for over 6 years. And in my role, I am responsible for linking people strategy and the business strategy to ensure that we can really truly deliver success for the organization and ensure that people can really bring their best selves to work and shine through this as we succeed as an organization. And then talking through diversity and inclusion pre-COVID, I'd say that we are a very diverse workforce in itself. You know, with presence in over 40 countries, we have a variety of people with different types of cultural background and so on and so forth. But we truly have been on a very intentional D&I journey only over the past few years. Initially, with a very large focus on the gender diversity aspect. Our CEO, Mick Farrell, has been very deliberate about bringing diversity to our board. Currently, we have 38% of our board represented by women. We rank in the top 20% of the S&P 500 companies for that reason. Over the last couple of years through our D&I journey, we've made quite a bit of progress in some of the areas around organic formation of employee resource groups, ERGs as they're called in many companies. We've had multiple global and local inclusion initiatives, whether it's focused on women through lots of conversation and encouraging people to tell stories and share their experiences, which gets people to think about various relevant issues or challenges women experience. Similarly, with the LGBTIQA plus community, we have a very active ERG group called RESPECT. And every year they have multiple initiatives. One key initiative that we really celebrate every year has been the Wear It Purple Day, which is sometimes can be seen as, just an event in the year, but it is quite symbolic. It does get people to share what their experience has been and what we can truly learn from external experience too, because we bring in outside in to talk to us about what we can do more from an LGBTIQA plus community. So recently, based on what we heard from some external panelists, we introduced the concept of providing the opportunity for people to declare their preferred pronouns. It may sound really simple, but it's quite tricky for people to have that conversation when they don't necessarily associate themselves with the standard pronouns that we all assume the other is based on how they look, right? So that's something that we've recently done. We very actively work with high schools and universities to encourage women in STEM. From a race and ethnicity perspective, and I will be very honest here and say that, that's something that we've really picked up only maybe post-COVID, but based on everything that's happened recently in the US around the George Floyd horrific killing and the BLM movement. So we've now started recognizing Martin Luther King as a holiday for our US-based teams. We are sponsoring MedTech color sponsorships in many organizations. We have started participating in terms of matching ResMed donations, ResMedian donations for nonprofit organizations in local communities. We've created extensive L&D material around unconscious bias, inclusion in teams. What does it truly look like? How do you actually have a conversation which will help remove bias to some degree? And just general creation of curation and creation of material from ResMedians sharing their experience around diversity and inclusion. So those are some things that I've done. Sorry, very long-winded answer to what you asked, but we're very proud of where we are right now in our journey with D&I.
Thank you very much, Nupur. It is a really interesting journey, both as a company, but more importantly, as your diversity and inclusion journey so far. And I say so far, it's a massive portfolio of activities and things that you have to bring together into a D&I strategy in the organization. So thank you for that story. Rowan, I expect that most people know that Boeing, and many of us have probably flown in a Boeing-built aeroplane at some point in their lives. Can you please introduce yourself and your D&I journey, but also tell us a bit more about Boeing and the diversity of the organization and the people that make up the company? And how is Boeing addressing diversity and inclusion in the pre-COVID world?
Thanks, Shane. Well, my role here is actually taking care of the global equity, diversity, inclusion agenda for Boeing Australia, New Zealand, and also APAC, so all of Asia. The Boeing business in Australia is actually the largest entity outside the US, with close to about 3,000 staff. They cover everything from manufacturing in Melbourne, our defence sites around Australia, Boeing Research and Technology, which is at the forefront, but also autonomous vehicles. So working with different ways of using different technology. The diversity and inclusion agenda that we have here has been embedded in the corporate strategy since inception here in Australia. It's part of the enterprise solution that we're able to provide opportunity for everybody to be themselves. Fundamentally, across the agenda here in Australia, we do focus on inclusion. It's actually the key piece that we focus on. And we look at 3 or 4 specific areas that we look at. The first and foremost is our reconciliation action plan. But working in Australia, I think it's important that we have a strong connection to Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and having those conversations on how we address employment, how we support communities, but it's all importantly actually how we actually embed ourselves in the supply chain here in Australia. And we're proud to say that we've done a significant amount of work there to provide commercial opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses through companies like IDIC and Supply Nation. And from there, we're actually working in gender, working across STEM, as Nupur was talking about, actually looking for those opportunities to be able to increase the representation of women at all levels of the organisation and returning back to work. Working at the early ages with our university team, working with universities, looking at that interns, and also then to see how we turn those interns into graduates and open up opportunities across the Australian enterprise. We do also focus very heavily on our veterans. 20% of our workforce is made up by veterans. Something that is unique to Boeing in Australia, and we are very proud of looking at the opportunities that we can look at those transferable skills and services that veterans bring. They work very heavily within our organisation and provide us opportunities to drive a performance culture, but also that opportunity to link back to the Defence Force. Just recently, we've started our first Pride Alliance outside the US, and the first one outside the US in this region, having a broader conversation around the LGBTQI sector and seeing what opportunities and development that we can provide, and creating awareness actually across the broader Boeing community itself. Working within Boeing Australia, we're not in isolation. I work very closely with the other regions around the world to see how we can push across best practice, test different concepts, but also create the nuances that these regions need when we get sort of instructions from the US around what we're driving across diversity and inclusion. I guess when Nupur would be through the same experience that we do need to cater for local requirements, local laws, but also local language. And if anything, what we're doing here at Boeing with the diversity and inclusion agenda is really addressing how we think, how we talk, and how we act to be more inclusive.
Great, thank you, Rowan. And I'm listening to you talking about Boeing there, and reminds me that one of the great opportunities of being a member of an organisation like AmCham is that you actually get to see and hear about so many companies that and their stories that you wouldn't otherwise know about. This is some fantastic initiatives that are not so obvious to buyers of the product, perhaps, or those of us who use your products over time. So thank you for explaining that for me. So this next question, I'm going to ask you both the same question and give you some time to answer. But if we think about the fact that we all know COVID-19 had a massive impact on the way individuals and organisations work. We all experienced impact to our working lives. And different employees experience different impacts in different ways. And I'm very aware of the group that I'm sitting in at the moment may have had different experiences to other employees and other people in the workforce. But can you tell me from your own organisation's point of view, how well or not, if that's the case, did your organisation and your employees respond initially to the crisis? Back there in February, March, April, when we started the lockdown, when we started to think that this might be a bigger crisis than we thought. How did your organisations respond to the crisis? What support did you initially put in place, and how did you handle the disruption to the workforce? And from there, what are some of the lessons you learned that you may be taking into the future? And I'm going to ask Rowan to answer that question first.
Thanks, Shane. Well, I think if anything, COVID got all businesses by surprise. It's been actually the ultimate adaptive challenges for business. When you think about the restrictions in travel, isolations, and when lockdowns came into place, we had to think about the variety of businesses and skills we had across either locations, states, and worked out how we actually mobilise that team really well. Working remotely in many cases wasn't simply plug and play across our business, given the nature of some of our contracts, security restrictions, people physically working in factory sites. We had to think a little bit differently from there. First of all, we ensured that we had the right technology in place, but also the right level of communication in engaging our leaders. One of the most important pieces here was the communication, to ensure that as we develop new pay practices, new policies around working from home, and I shouldn't say new, it was enhanced policies working from home and enhancing our conversation on how people can work safely in that remote location. That also meant engaging with leaders differently to say, okay, well now you don't always have that line of sight engagement with your employees. How are you going to work differently with all your employees now working in those locations? In some circumstances, we had maybe the privilege of slowly moving people to different locations. In some circumstances, they were quite quickly. So, as I said, it was an adaptive challenge, and the ability to have the right policies and processes in place, develop the culture around that to ensure that we're keeping our employees safe, because working from home, to be quite frank, in a short period of time, wasn't new for many of us. We've been working remotely, and I think the key thing is when people talk about flexible working and remote working, they are two different things. Remote working, if you're working from a different place from your office, you're working from home, but many of us have been working from homes, hotel rooms, airport lounges, to be able to get things done. This was in a more permanent circumstances. So in those situations, to make sure we had the right safety protocols in place, the right communication with leaders to be able to check in. And if anything, that communication was actually the strongest piece. Even today, we get daily communications around COVID, the impact, check-ins on how we can actually engage with our people. And that didn't only come from HR. That came from our technology area, came from our legal area, came from our comms area. So we had multiple reminders about how to check in from that perspective. Later on, I'll talk about a little bit about the wellness piece, because I think as we go from short-term to long-term, which we did experience, how do we ensure that we keep that conversation going? I think there were some silent heroes in this process as well. So when you start mobilising that that tripartite of the legal team, HR and technology, they made that transition go as seamlessly as possible to make sure we had continuation of business. And without those teams working so well together in a collaborative way, which I'm proud to say Boeing does extremely well, I don't think we would have been as successful as we possibly could have been. Look, there are and always will be some hurdles along the way in ensuring that people have the right technology and people can work remotely. Working from home also has the impact on people's bandwidth and other issues. And when you start thinking of a workforce of 150,000 people around the world doing that, it has an impact on technology, but we overcame that quite quickly.
Thank you, Rowan. And Nupur, I'll ask you the same question from ResMed's perspective. And what was the initial response and how did ResMed handle the reaction to the crisis? And what are some of the lessons that you learned or things that you did well that you'll improve into the future?
Thanks, Shane. And, like Rowan said, obviously caught everybody by surprise, right? Nobody was expecting this. And I think early days, January, maybe 2020, there was this sentiment, I think, in some parts of the world that this has happened in Asia and will vanish in Asia, right? It's never going to become a global issue ever. So I think our organization did experience that too. But being an extremely mission and purpose-driven organization, I think I cannot say enough how proud I am to be a ResMedian. We truly, truly stepped up and responded to the crisis in the best way that we could. Because, as I said before, it has been an opportunity to serve hundreds and thousands of patients around the world. And I'd say that, a can-do attitude is something which is very, very much part of the ResMed DNA. And that really helped us mobilize people across the organization to be able to pivot supply chain production, so on and so forth, whatever it takes to collaborate across businesses and geographic boundaries to ensure that we can truly manufacture the ventilators that are required globally to address, the pandemic. So that was maybe more from a patient perspective, but internally too, obviously, everything changed for our people. And as Rowan said, that was, one really needed to adapt work arrangements. So for a lot of our teams, I'd say over 90% of our people, we were able to pivot working from home overnight. Unlike what Rowan said about Boeing, where a lot of people were used to working from home or other places. And it's different, of course, when you're doing this on a choice basis versus once in a, versus having to do this constantly. So we did experience that too. But I'd say a lot of our people had never really worked from home who didn't necessarily travel. So it was like literally pivoting to a working from home model for over 90% of our people overnight, mid-March, I think. And again, very many silent heroes, right, within the IT team and my HR team to ensure that we can truly collaborate and ensure the appropriate infrastructure. Even simple things like extra Zoom licenses, like, everybody now does conference calls. The organization doesn't always sign up for that many licenses because people are working in the office on a at normal times. Other things like extra laptops, screens, so on and so forth. So just ensuring the appropriate infrastructure so that people can truly work effectively from wherever they are was a huge emphasis. And I'm very proud to say that there was great partnership and people were very patient and worked really well with the teams to ensure that we could do this as seamlessly as possible. But on the other side, we have tech services teams, we have manufacturing teams, which absolutely really had no choice in this time but to come in, because we couldn't pause our production lines, especially on ventilation, right? So we really needed to up our ante on workplace safety, ensuring the social distancing norms, ensuring that we make sure that people feel safe when they come into work, right? Ensure that we're doing everything in our capacity to not have any contamination on our side. And I'm very proud to say that all of our ventilation production predominantly happens in Australia. And we have over 300 people who are on the production lines doing this. And so we did everything in our, in our capacity to make sure that they felt safe. And we're very proud we have had no contamination of any kind on the factory floor. But again, to Rowan's point, working from home for the rest of the individuals, or over 90% of our organization, hasn't necessarily been the easiest. So we've really had to up the ante on communication, really humanize what people are experiencing. And that's not just HR and IT, that's leadership across the organization, sharing what they're experiencing through the pandemic. From an HR perspective, we've provided a lot of material around, flexible working guides, what you can't do, what can you, how can you flex with meetings, because I think everybody's sick of the endless Zoom calls and constantly putting up the best face on a video conference, right? It's not easy. So just having explicit permission that you don't always need to be on video. You can always record calls, listen in. You don't have to always join in in unsocial hours. Make your meeting times maybe 55 minutes instead of 60 minutes. Very simple things, but because at least you have a 5-minute break before the next one. So things like that, tactical, but I think very practical to be able to do. Also, from a well-being perspective, a lot of focus on building out a global EAP program, which people use, trying to take out the stigma from using EAP and sharing stories around that. We had a pretty comprehensive enterprise-wide survey as well to understand how people are experiencing things, what do they foresee as future work arrangements do, such that we can take a pretty informed view on where things may be in the future for us. So all up, I'd say that I've never been more proud to be a ResMedian and everything that we have done in the response to the pandemic. But like any organization, it hasn't come without its challenges, like Rowan said. I wish that one of the key learnings, I'd say, has been not to assume things will be hunky-dory always, to have a better crisis management, maybe playbook plan that we could really get into quickly. And the other bit, I'd say a positive, a really key lesson is that business as usual leadership styles can't continue in the current environment. We really need to be adaptive, really agile, break hierarchies, be much more open. So really, really have learned the lesson to be more transparent, open, courageous about what's happening. None of us know what the future holds, and accepting that and bringing people along that there is no shame in that. So just being really much more open is a key lesson. And I don't know, Rowan, how you're experiencing this at Boeing, but I would say 9 months in, maybe 10 months into the pandemic, there's a sense of fatigue, a real burnout in teams. So a key learning, of course, has been to continue the focus on well-being. We just recently had a well-being holiday in ResMed, just a day, and I will say that a day can't make the burnout go away, right? But I think it sent a very strong message across the organization that it's okay to talk about well-being. It's okay to focus on self-care, and because that's when we bring our best selves to work. And we've had an amazing response to that. And it has, I think, encouraged a lot of managers to check in more and ask the question, how are you doing, of their people, which sometimes we take so much for granted. So really, to be more prepared is a key lesson, but to be able to pivot from a leadership perspective and really focus on well-being, I'd say are some key lessons we've had through this experience so far.
Thank you, Nupur, for that. And again, so many initiatives and so many ideas. And I'm glad that you finished on the discussion about leadership and also embedding behaviours in the way people check in and lead their teams and take responsibility. I look at my own response to COVID, and I can say proudly that I love flexible working. I love working from home. I'm well set up. I'm sitting in a large house on a big block in a leafy suburb. I can go for a walk. I can have a home office. I've got all of the facilities I need. And I would also say that I've had, let's say, 30 years experience of professional life, and I don't feel I need to be in the office to understand how offices work and how to get on with the team and how to grow an organisational culture. I've got a lot of experience. And in RGP, most of our consultants are similar. They are experienced people with experience in organisations. They've been working flexibly. They know how to be a flexible, autonomous, taking responsibility worker. But not everybody's like that. And also not all of our listeners are coming from big, well-resourced organisations with global HR structures as well. So I want to look outside the box a little bit and perhaps not come up with the answers, but ask some questions and looking forward. What are some of the things that we need to be aware of, perhaps concerned about? What are some of the red flags we need to be aware of that we could start having conversations? How do we look to the future post-COVID, if we can use that term? How will workplaces change? And what are some of the positives and negatives that we need to be aware of in this future of work? And I'll break this question down into two areas. And I'm going to ask Nupur first to talk to me about how organisations might continue to build diversity in this new way of working. And then I'm going to ask Rowan to talk about inclusion and inclusiveness and how we make sure that that's maintained in this future way of working. So over to you, Nupur.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shane. So like you said, you're enjoying working from home and you've got a great setup to do so, Shane. And, personally, I've always worked from home a couple of days, at least a week, and I've had that setup. But I think everybody is experiencing this working from home quite differently because there is no choice in the matter anymore. And flexibility is about having choice. So I think one of the important things about the future really is really understanding what flexibility truly means for an individual. What kind of flexible norms can work in a team setup? Because it's got to work for the team, it's got to work for the organization, and it has to work for the individual, right? So flexibility can't just be about working from home, but different shifts, job sharing, blended teams. How do you make all of that work? So I think in the future, there will be much, much more emphasis and conversations around that, because now everybody's had a taste of what it feels like to work from home, and whether they're set up right or not, whether they enjoy it or not, and so on and so forth. And I think from a diversity perspective, it's an interesting challenge in itself, because currently the world is grappling with the pandemic very differently, right? We here in Australia, I think, are extremely fortunate. So the conversation around flexibility and all of these will happen faster. Whereas in the US, there's still, this is not a conversation to be having as much, because they have no choice. They have kids still working, schooling from home. There are working parents, there are primary caregivers who are just responsible for, family and work day to day. So what flexibility means for them today is very different to what flexibility for maybe an Aussie is. And it's different in Asia, and it's different in Europe, and so on and so forth. So I think diversity is really trying to understand what flex means at a local level and addressing needs and challenges accordingly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It does, though, I think, in a very positive way, also help us attract and retain more diverse talent, interestingly, because it's no longer about being in the office, right? It's no longer that you got to be sitting across my desk. So I can hire literally anywhere from. So that encourages maybe bringing in much more diverse talent than we normally would have been able to, because not everybody is mobile, not everybody is willing to move. from a state even to another state. So I think that's one of the positives that we will see in time to come in terms of hiring practices. I'd say the challenge is going to be around the culture. How do you make people feel fairly included, really belonging to an organization if they never experience the organization from a physical entity perspective, being with the team. So to really shift mindset, how we go about it, I don't have answers really, Shane, but that's something that we will need to really work through. If I may, for a moment, just talk about gender diversity and COVID. We recently participated in a McKinsey and Lean In organizational study, and it's a very US focused study. But it has really highlighted that the pandemic has possibly affected women far more adversely than men in the corporate world, because it could lead to lots of women maybe just leaving the workforce because they're just managing their priorities at home and priorities at work, and it's very difficult to do so, and because a lot of pressure on home comes on the women, unfortunately, and also could possibly affect women of color much more so than white women, right? So I think from an organizational lens, being aware of that, we are trying to be much more intentional about gender conversations in the company. We're trying to find ways to support primary caregivers better, bringing both genders along into the conversation. So we're trying to be very deliberate about talent acquisition practices with diversity slates and so on and so forth. But equally with our leave policies, trying to build some flex into it, trying to come up with, how do we find emergency care services more easily for the employee, partner with the employee to help support primary caregivers better, and so on and so forth. And also really role modeling, if required, to take some time off, because there's sometimes a bit of a stigma about saying, I need to look after myself and I need to take some time off. So just encouraging that conversation more. Again, not a comprehensive list of solutions, but things that we're trying to dabble with and trial across the organization.
Great, thank you, Nupur. And Rowan, same scenario. Looking ahead at the opportunities and challenges in D&I in a post-COVID world of work, what do you see as the threats to inclusion in the new way of working, and what issues do organisations need to plan for?
Thanks, Shane. And look, I could echo a lot of the things that Nupur has talked about, but I think one of the biggest issues we're going to face into is complacency. People falling back into the old practices of the way of working, that line of sight working, and trying to not try and support, I won't even say it's a new way of working now, it's just a different way of working, where we actually see people working in hybrid roles. So working remotely, wherever remotely may be, or working, returning back to the office. And we're seeing that, that tension at the moment in the marketplace, where people are returning back to the workplace and trying to find that work-life efficiency between working remotely and working in the workplace itself, and having leaders or managers actually working with teams that they don't always see every day of the week. I will say proudly to say that at Boeing, we continue to invest in that leadership enhancement, and early next year we're rolling out an enterprise program around the world to all our leaders, actually our staff as well, around how we actually create safer conversations around psychological safety, creating environments where people can speak up and have those conversations, but also how to seek a little bit more information in the way we're actually getting details, and then having that very attentive way of listening and then coming up with the appropriate solution. So it's that type of enhancement of learning and training that we're going to try and use to erode any complacency that kicks into the business itself. The other way is actually considering that by us looking at people working remotely, we need to be also open that there's going to be new employment structures that we need to consider. Now, we are very traditional, like many organisations, you have full-time and part-time or or casual workers. What does that look like for somebody in the gig economy? How do we employ somebody who wants to work for multiple companies? How do we manage the IP between those people and bring them into the organisation on a project basis as well? Nupur talked about the impact that this has had on women, COVID's had on women. And in Australia, the research shows that while women have more positions in casual and part-time work, they were the victims of many of the redundancies and the laybacks that we saw within the Australian marketplace. So, that war on talent has to be something that the new way of looking at COVID-19 or post that was see actually how we actually harness talent. Boeing is not immune to this. Unfortunately, with the change of demand in some of our product, we've had to recalibrate some of our businesses. But at the same time, other parts of our businesses continue to look for the best talent in the marketplace. I think currently we've got something like 300 jobs available at the moment. So just to show that the economy is still there, it's a case of looking at where we actually can push opportunity for a broader group of people working for the organisation itself. Talking about complacency, coming back to somebody you're working with who's not working in the office. Working from home, I think the key word in that sentence is not working, it's actually home. At home, you share your place with so many other people in your family. And sometimes we need to find the efficiency in the rules, the boundaries. Research has shown just recently that while people have been working remotely, productivity actually hasn't gone backwards, it's actually improved. In the circumstances where people are doing less travel, but also the increase in productivity, what does that mean on personal fatigue? People have the ability to work longer. The laptop is in a study, it's on a kitchen desk, it's somewhere that they can get to. And then all of a sudden it's a situation where they may be working longer hours. We haven't seen any longitudinal studies just yet, but what impact has that had on the household, on the relationship between dads and mums and people within the household, how that's worked on people in isolation who are not seeing people on a regular basis or having that connectivity. And we're doing some work around wellness and raising that awareness around people working remotely and the art of conversation to be able to check in. I think Nupur put it quite eloquently as well. But the risk of anything in these circumstances is thinking that COVID will go away or a similar threat is never going to be there. If we fall back into it and don't have the right disaster recovery plans or something that's going to be a little bit more immediate that we've had before, is going to be a risk to any type of business. So if anything at the moment, where we are looking to be as nimble as possible, challenging some very traditional thinking, opening up broader conversations and looking to empower our people to be more open to change and opportunity. And I think, if anything, this is an opportunity more than anything in this adaptive challenge.
Thank you, Rowan, and thank you, Nupur. I know that when I started talking to you about this topic, that there would be a lot of interesting and insightful conversation, and I'm blown away by how much has already been done and how much there is to do. So I hope that we've raised some questions, we've given some ideas, and hopefully we've encouraged people to join in the conversation, because there is no right way yet. I'm sure there's plenty of studies in the future, but plenty of conversations to have to look at ways to enhance and continue to improve diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Because we're getting close to the end of time, I'm going to ask you to take yourselves off mute and give you 20 seconds to sum up or to say goodbye, and then we'll close down our podcast for today. So, Nupur, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and it's, it is these conversations that we can truly learn from. I've already learned a few things from Rowan based on what they're doing at Boeing, and I'd love, Rowan, if you're open to having a conversation around the reconciliation plan that you drive from a D&I perspective in Australia. So yeah, but thank you very much, and looking forward to many more such conversations.
Thank you. Rowan?
Thank you very much, AmCham, to have this conversation. It's been great having a conversation with Nupur and seeing some of your insights as well, Shane. I think anything for the listeners is, as my last message before was, don't fall into the complacency and continue to have those conversations. Those conversations face-to-face or virtually are important. Staying connected and ensuring our staff and your staff are feeling safe and included is extremely important. And Nupur, more than happy to have that conversation as well. So thank you.
All right, and thank you both again for joining us today. And for those who are watching and listening, you can download this video from AmCham's website, as well as a number of other videos and podcasts about diversity and inclusion. And I'd really encourage you to download and listen, but also share it to your community, share it to your workplace, share it on LinkedIn, and get people involved in the conversation. So thank you again, and goodbye.